Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and I'm back with a sewing tutorial for you this time. This is a really handy accessory that I love to have on all my yarn cakes, so whether you knit or crochet, you might find that you need one of these. All right, before we start making it, let's show you a yarn cozy in use, right? So here I'm knitting myself a cardigan, and you can see that the yarn that's connected, the working yarn that I'm working from, is coming from the center of this cake that I wound, and the yarn cozy is around it. So I've already used one of these balls of yarn, and the same yarn cozy you see here held it all the way till it was down to nothing. Then I wound a new ball, put the sleeve on it, and now I continue to work from here, and you can see that it just stays nice and put together. And as you continue using the yarn and it becomes less and less left in here, the yarn cozy really holds everything together so it doesn't just fall apart on you. And if you knit or crochet, you know what I'm talking about when I say fall apart on you. So if we have a look at what it is, it's just a simple sleeve made out of stretchy fabric, okay? And I've made several already. This is cotton spandex fabric, and this is a double brushed polyester spandex fabric. In my experience, I would recommend that you use something that has spandex. So if you get a cotton fabric that's just 100% cotton and it's a knit fabric, it will stretch, but it will likely stay stretched out. The spandex allows it to bounce back and gives it what I call good stretch return. So it's gonna stretch, and as it jumps back into place, it's going to just hug the yarn cake and keep it put together as you work from it, okay? Now there are some options that you can buy. These are like commercial ones that are sold with different little characters and colors on here, and I will include links on where you can find these ones if you don't sew or don't want to make them for yourself, and then also on where you can find the appropriate fabrics that will work for this, because we do sell it in our online shop. So again, remember to find something that has some spandex in it, and you definitely want to work with fabric that has what I would call four-way stretch, meaning the fabric stretches along the lengthwise grain and also along the crosswise grain. We need to have stretch vertically and horizontally on the fabric that you're using. So let me show you with this cake how I would put the yarn cozy on. So I just slip my hand in here, and this one I know is tied to the tag, like the tail end is tied to the tag, so I would start working from it this way. So I'm just going to slip my hand through the yarn cozy and come from underneath the cake, opening my fingers like this so that I can hold it, and then just slip the yarn cozy over my hand all the way up. And you can just stretch it out, make sure it's good and in place, nothing's gonna come apart. And then you would just, find the tail end here in the center and start working from it. All right, so that's if we're pulling from the center. Now let me show you, if you have a cake wound like this still, but you like to work from the sides instead of from the center, let's tuck that in. You can still use this. As long as it doesn't fit super duper tight and too snug, you'll be able to do it the same way. So I'm just gonna slip this on. There we go. And then you can see how you can still just pull from your working yarn, even from around the sides and not just the center of your cake, okay? Let's go ahead and set this stuff aside, and I will show you how to make one. All right, for fabric, I like to start off with one 9.5-inch square piece of fabric. Now this is cotton spandex, this is double brushed polyester spandex, and this is cotton spandex again. And I have 3 samples here so we can talk a little bit about them. Now the cotton spandex is going to stretch, remember we said in both directions. So this way it has a good amount of stretch, you can see how much I get there. But when I let it go, it bounces right back into shape. That's the spandex in it. Now if I stretch it this way, you can see it still has a good amount of stretch, but not quite as much as in this direction. So I know that this is likely the crosswise grain of my fabric, and you'll want to find that before we start folding it and have to sew it, because we want the stretchiest dimension of the fabric to be going horizontally this way so it can stretch that way around a full cake of yarn. All right, so this is cotton spandex. Remember, there's links in the description box on where you can find it. This is double brush polyester spandex, also called DBP. Now this stuff is super stretchy. In this direction doesn't have quite as much, and I bet you that's the lengthwise grain. And in this direction, now that I've turned it, it has a ton of stretch, okay? Oftentimes 100% or more. So for this, I know that I want to have the stretchiest direction going horizontally in front of me. Now this sample here again is cotton spandex, which is a makeup of about 95% cotton and 5% spandex, which we want. This is now a directional print. And that means that because it has all these little kitties and little birdies on them, it reads this way from top to bottom, right? So if you have teddy bears or little horses or text, you don't want it to end up like this necessarily. So I made this one so you can see what happens if you orient a directional print incorrectly. Instead of the cats being upright, they're sideways. It's still a yarn cozy and you can still use it, but I'll share with you the tips here on how to make sure that you're orienting it correctly so that the finished yarn cozy will display the cats the way that they're meant to be read. So go ahead and grab some pins, and I like to use my ballpoint pins whenever I'm working with stretchy fabrics, and the same thing is going to apply for the needle that we'll use at the machine. Go ahead and put in a ballpoint or jersey needle because we're working with stretchy fabrics. So if it's a directional print, you're going to fold it in half this way, all right? So orient it the way you want it to read. Then you're going to fold it in half and match the raw edges. We'll place a couple of pins across the top here, and that's where we're going to sew with a slightly zigzagged stitch, okay? A lightning stitch, stretch stitch, it's often called. We don't want to sew this with a straight stitch because what's going to happen is if there's a straight line of stitches there, once we pull it, all the stitches are going to pop and it's not going to hold together. So we'll go ahead and make a couple at once. So this one has a design on it, but it's not really directional, right? Because it can read this way or this way. It doesn't matter which way the stars are oriented. So this is what I would recommend to begin with. Just fold a square in half, and we're going to stitch across here using 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is kind of a small piece, so I won't even pin that one. But if you need pins, just go ahead and use those. Now let's head to the sewing machine. We're going to select our zigzag lightning or stretch stitch here, and we're going to stitch it down just across this edge. All right, so at the sewing machine, I have a ballpoint jersey needle in the size 80-12 in the machine. Then for the stitch here, I'm going to select a zigzag. And this is mostly for those of you that don't have a lot of decorative stitches. You can take the zigzag, and if your machine allows you to adjust stitch length and width, you can change this to be a shorter, narrower zigzag, which is what we want because we want the fabric to still be able to stretch, but we want the seam line to play almost like a straight stitch without being a straight stitch, because then the stitches would pop. So we have the zigzag selected, and on my machine, and you can play around with this on a scrap piece to make sure, I'm going to drop the stitch width, meaning the zig and the zag going this way and this way is going to be 2.2 millimeters. So that's quite, not that wide. So that's good. And then for the stitch length, I'm going to go up to a 2.0. So somewhere around, I would say if you're playing around with it to find what settings work on your machine, try 2 millimeters width and 2 millimeter length and see where that is. And then you can play from there. So I'm going to leave mine like that. I do have a stretch stitch option on my machine. If you have a machine that has a lot of decorative stitches, then you can find one that looks like this. And I'll show you what it looks like in case you have it. So it's a slanted kind of lightning stitch or stretch stitch. So just check your user manual or write on your machine and see if you can find something that looks like that. In this case, it has it at a 1 millimeter width and 3 millimeter in length. But for the shape of the regular zigzag, let me go back. I'm going to put mine to 2.2 and 2.0. And every machine is slightly different, even though they say the measurements are the same. All right, so I'm going to use about 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch this here. Now, it is going to be helpful, especially if you're working with a fabric that maybe doesn't have that much stretch, to stretch the fabric as it stitches this here. This will give a little bit more wiggle room in there while you're stretching the yarn cozy to go over the yarn cake and won't let the stitches pop on you. So just give it a tug. You still are feeding the fabric through the machine, okay? Don't hold on to it too much, but we just want to stretch the fabric a little bit. Notice I'm not even back stitching. I don't need to because I'm going to come across this row of stitching here in the next one. All right, so now you've made a tube, okay? I'm going to turn this tube right side out. Let's do it like this. Insert my hand so that I have that side seam that we just sewed. And then I'm going to bring the other open end over it, bending the fabric right there. So I'm matching up where the seam is on this end of it with this one. I'm sending the seam allowance, one of them in one direction and one in the other, so they abut nicely and we reduce some bulk there. Okay, hold them right there and then flip this fabric over itself. So now we've basically folded the entire tube in half so that the fabric is touching pretty sides together. And just accommodate everything here to have these two raw edges touching, because that's where you're going to sew next. And you can put pins if you need to. It's kind of small. I can make these really quickly. All right. And so now, because my machine is set into a table, I can't really drape this open area over the free arm of the machine, this thing here. So I'm going to show you how you would do it if you too have a machine that is set into a table. If your machine sits on top of a table, then you can remove the accessory bin to just expose this free arm area, and then you would just drape this over that part, okay? And you can sew it from the outside, but I'm going to sew it from the inside by slipping the fabric underneath the presser foot. Okay, align everything first before you start sewing. Make sure those seam allowances going opposite direction. And you're using the same stretch stitch here too, and then also making sure that you're giving the fabric a little tug as we work our way around. Just start somewhere. You don't have to backstitch. I'm giving it a tug. And so you see how, because we're sewing it from the inside, we sew an inch or two, stop, and then just kind of roll the fabric forward towards you. Then that gives you another little chunk here that you can sew straight. Just straightening out these edges. The jersey fabric will roll on you. All right, so I give myself this space, stretch it a little as it stitches. 1/4 of an inch seam allowance or so. Just try to be consistent. So I rolled it forward, give myself some more. And I'm going to work my way around, and I'm going to stop an inch before those first stitches. So I can see I started sewing here where that seam is, and I'm going to sew almost all the way there. You don't need to leave much of a hole here because it's not a lot of fabric and it stretches. You'll easily be able to flip this right side out. So here are my stitches, and I'm going to stop right here. So I did do a couple little back stitches there. And now it's sewn all the way around except for here. You can see you only need about an inch opening here. Then you're going to flip the whole thing out through there. And leaving a smaller hole just gives you less to have to stitch up afterwards. And that's it. You don't have any raw edges. All we need to do is seal up that little hole. So I set it up so that the hole is going to be on the inside. So just kind of roll everything in till you get it nice and smooth. And you can see that with this directional print, because we folded it correctly, now the cats are reading from top to bottom as they should be. And this is cotton spandex, so I would hit this with an iron just to give it a final good flat press. All right. So that's that. Now the inside is where the hole is. So flip it wrong side out. I'm just going to pinch the fabric. So I'm not sewing all the way through to this layer because then those stitches are going to show on the outside. Just pinch the two fabric pieces where the hole is. And you can stitch this up by hand or by machine. It's going to be on the inside, so I'm just going to do it by machine. Notice I've separated it from the back part of it. I'm just going to do now a straight stitch. Start here and back stitch, stitch just across the inch opening, and then back stitch again to secure it. And stitch really close to the outer edge. And that's going to be the quickest way to stitch that little hole shut. And that's why I say leave a small opening. All right. And there, give it a good press, is your finished yarn cozy. I'm going to go ahead and finish up this one, and then we'll talk a little bit more. And here you can see how easy it was to quickly make those two yarn cozies and the difference in the same directional print based on how you folded it to start. So let's go ahead and take this one off. You can take them off and on. Just try to be gentle and try to reduce the number of times that you're doing that, because obviously the more friction that the cake gets on the sides, the more it's going to start to pull away from it. But I just want you all to see how this would work or how it would look, right? Because this one was done correctly. Super cute. All right, so there you have it. That is how you sew your own yarn cozies using some stretch knit fabrics. Now, if you need to find some fabric that's suitable for this project, I've included links for you in the description box below, so check those out. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your crafty friends, and don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Thanks again for watching. Leave me a comment below and let me know what you thought, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. So a yarn cozy is this little sleeve that you see that's, oh my God, center or from the outside of your cake. We'll talk everything, needles, thread, stitch length, and I don't know why I'm talking so much.